So today's task is harvesting bass lines. And what do I mean by that? Now, some of you who understand software better, recording software, might have seen that there's a lot of tracks on this thing. And truth be told, I am much farther ahead on making the song than I am making videos about me making my song. Um, and certainly Basslines is also a case in point here. I've now played the track through its entirety 4 times on the bass guitar. And now I'm going to go through and find out if there's anything in that that I want to keep. Now, why would I write bass lines that I may or may not want to keep? And that's because I have this technique of which when the song is new, I just want to throw down some spur of the moment kind of scat bass lines just to see where it goes. Now, I often don't even know what key I'm in. And I just go look for groups of notes that work together and then start riffing within them and see where it goes. And especially when the song is new and I don't really remember how the arrangement works, to just play, spur of the moment, see what comes out of me is a great way to get ideas that I wouldn't in a more analytical sense ever come up with. Now, in my mind, it's really hard to understand anything about human beings until you understand that a human being is something that manifestates from a brain, and a brain that is highly departmentalized. And not all these departments work really well with each other. Now, the part of my brain that I call me and that you call you is a very analytical and language driven part of your brain. It's also the newest and least sophisticated part of your brain. Now, at least in the beginning, when I'm looking for inspiration, I want my musical brain to be playing my instrument. I don't want to rely on the more analytical brain to sit there and say, these notes go with these chords, blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. I want to just play and see what comes out of that musical brain, because in my case, I started playing guitar when I was 13, so that's like some 47 years ago. I have been tending to my musical brains for decades. I have been practicing my instrument with it. I've been loading it full of music that I've listened to. There's a lot of stuff in there, and you gotta kind of stand back and just say, here we go, musical brain. Here's an instrument, here's a song, what do you think? Show me what you got. Now, is spur of the moment, pull out of your ass bass playing the best way to do things? Not necessarily, and certainly in the course of a song, I might use any number of techniques. I may go from the very inspired to the very analytical, like start thinking about chord roots and fundamentals and notes of chords to decide what I want to play next. But it's a nice starting point. This is my bass. It is a vintage relic instrument, as this one turns out to be. It was relic by the factory. They used a technique called dropping it on the floor. This is an old style, 80s style relic here, where you just pick it up and you drop it on the damn floor. Now, this worked out extraordinarily well for me, because then I got this for, even in the 80s, this thing was $700-800, but because they dropped it on the floor, I got it for $250. And the other cool thing about it is that there's only 3 of these. This is a prototype for a line of basses that they never released. And I guess there's 2 other on the planet somewhere, but this one's mine. Now, you'll notice one thing. I've capoed the bass off here, sin of sins. And that's because the bass just kills my tendonitis, especially when I'm down here in the low notes and the reaches are really big because the frets are far apart. So in this case, I've capoed off here and I'm playing up here. And the first question you got to ask yourself is, look, it's a bass. It's supposed to play low notes. If you've got it capoed off like that, how the hell do you get any low notes out of it? And that's where this malarkey that I have sitting on the floor comes into play. So signal path is the idea that when you record music, what is in between the instrument and the recording? Now with electric instruments, it's you start with an instrument, then you go down these chords, and whatever you go through until you end up over here at the mixing desk and then into the computer is its signal path. Now acoustic instruments still have signal path. If I'm playing my cello, just doesn't go into the computer all by itself. It has to go through a microphone. So what am I using in this signal path to make up for capoing off the bass at those higher notes? First thing is I love my bass sounds with extra harmonic content. And this puts the dirt and the grit into it right here. It also cuts off all the low frequencies in the instrument because it was designed for playing guitar. And therefore, none of the low frequencies get through at all. So we got a bass that I'm not playing the low notes, then I put into a device that doesn't let any of the low frequencies through, but adds some grit to it. So far we're sounding like a disaster, but that's where this one comes in. What this one does is it makes a copy of whatever goes into this cable and makes it 1 octave lower. So I get a sound here that I like that's an octave higher than I want for my bass sounds. And then this reproduces it along with the original sound 1 octave lower. And the second little knob right there blends the two sounds together. And if you notice, actually, I have that knob turned down very low. So I've got a sound in the mid-range and the upper frequencies that I really like. And then we just add enough chocolate sauce on the bottom to make it a rich, fulfilling bass sound. Now, if you go watch videos about engineers saying how to make bass guitar sounds, they will not tell you to do this. They will tell you to take a direct line and then mic up an amplifier and all this other kind of stuff. And there's good reason why they do this, is because people have been very successful using that technique to make great bass sounds. But don't go online and just listen to whatever somebody says and then end up robbing yourself of the ability to go experiment with your gear. Now, you might come up with utter crap, but you might find something really cool that you like. And in this case, because I want to be playing those higher notes and not ravage my tendonitis-plagued forearm, I've come up with this, and it makes a sound that I'm totally in love with. Boy, it's kind of hard to get an instrument and my face in the video at the same time. But I want to do some recreational ranting about the bass guitar. Now, there are these poor lost souls that think that music have rules. And because they think this, they think that you actually have to obey those rules, like there's some sort of musical police that's going to come frickin' arrest you if you don't do things by these random prescribed things. Now, the first thing that bugs me is bass guitar is part of the rhythm section. It's like, this is a melodic instrument. Only difference between this and a guitar is the strings go lower, and I'll prove it to you. Notes! It's got lots of notes, which means you can use this thing melodically as any other instrument on the planet. Now, certainly you have to play in time, and I think that's particularly important with the bass guitar, but everybody should play in time, because otherwise you end up with this big stinking mess that makes no sense. But you find bass players who go like, okay, I'm not going to follow all these rules, like the ridiculous one that the bass can only sound when the drummer plays the kick drum. It's like, well, you know, you get a kick drum and a bass together, and you'll find you can play whenever you want to, regardless of what he's doing, you know, if you want to, because what the hell. Now, certainly you'll find bass players that don't obey these rules, and there's a word for those people, and that's called interesting, because they don't play the boring old pre-described stuff that somebody told them they had to do. They played what inspired them, what worked good with the music. And one of my favorite examples is the guy, Chris Squire, and those of you who know me will know, of course, that's the guy I was going to talk about. But if you think about the song Roundabout that came out when, I guess, early teenager for me, but you see at one point when this part comes through, he plays a thing of 500 million notes that flies through it, supporting the melody and a very melodic line. Later on in the song, the exact same part comes around and he plays just single notes. Whop, whop, whop. And I think that outlines at least somewhat the uh, spectrum that the bass guitar can take. It can be something supporting or counterpointing a melody. It can be in support of the chord structure, or it can contrast the chord structure. It can have rhythmic elements. You have all these different opportunities. And to limit that and say, you must play the root note of the chord and quarter notes and keep the beat. It's like, yeah, well, yeah, okay, keep the beat. I got that. But let's look at another bass player that a lot of people are familiar with. If you're old as dirt like me, and that's Paul McCartney in the Beatles. He played really cool melodic bass lines, and those songs are so much better for that idea. Now, given all that, my strategy of playing scat bass solos over the top of all my songs, will this come up with genius bass lines? It will come up most likely with a few cool ideas that I really like, but I'll also probably scrap most of what I've done so far. And then I'll have to dig deeper into my musical brain and say, okay, now I'm going to give you some time, not spur of the moment, but give you some time to say, like, what do we need to make this song work? And failing that, I may even go like, okay, it's a G chord, I'm going to play a G. Or I'm going to play the fourth of a G, or a fifth, or the third, or something along those lines. Just look at the notes that are available within that chord. But the starting point, I'm going to start with the inspiration, see what it gives me, take whatever I can out of that, go back and rehearse it, stick it back in. So I'm not going to play you me listening to this over and over and chopping out bits, because that would be boring as hell. So I'll let you get back to business, and I'll get back to business. And next time we'll talk about whatever the hell I'm up to that time. Bye now.